With today officially being Halloween, I thought it would be a great idea to wrap up spooky season with the game that started it all, Oblivion. I've covered scary quests, disturbing quests, unsettling quests, just about everything that you might want to watch on Halloween. However, there's an important part of the holiday that I've only ever touched on in one video. One of the biggest aspects of Halloween is trick-or-treating, putting on a costume, going house to house, asking for a trick or a treat. Everyone gives treats. Very rarely do people celebrate the trick aspect of the night. Well, in today's video, I thought I'd cover all of the tricks, goofs, pranks, deceptions, and leg pulls that the player does towards other NPCs in the game. These are all of the quests in the Elderscrolls for Oblivion, where the player tricks the third party in some kind of manner. Some of these are relatively harmless to the NPCs, while others are quite deadly. Let me know down below if you think I missed anything, and without further ado, let's get into the pranks. Starting off, we have Sanguine's Daedric quest. The whole premise of the mission is to prank Countess Alessia Caro. The Daedric prince thinks that she's a rather dull person. So, in order to spice up her life a bit, the player is tasked with getting inside of Leywin's dining hall and casting a spell. It's no ordinary spell though. It's called Stark Reality, and by casting it, everyone's clothes get removed. This leaves the Countess and her guests in nothing more than their underwear. From here, Sanguine is rather amused with the player's actions, and it's certainly a night that Leywin's nobles will never forget. Staying on the subject of Daedric princes, the next entry is Sheogorath's Daedric quest. The Mad God wants the player to trick a community of Khajiit into thinking that their Kashara prophecy is coming true. This prophecy is about the end of times, Tamriel's doom. The community is called Border Watch, and its residents are very superstitious. Their three signs of the Kashara prophecy are vermin, famine, and fear. Stealing their cheese, the player attracts a horde of rats. Taking their rat poison, the player kills off their livestock. As for the third sign, well, Sheogorath takes care of that one, and it works wonders. The Border Watch community is completely traumatized, and the Mad God gets a good laugh. Switching gears a bit, let's talk about the Dark Brotherhood. A lot of these quests involve deceit and trickery, especially if the player wants their bonus. The first contract that comes to mind for the storyline is the Assassinated Man. The player is hired by Francois Motier to fake his death. This is all in an attempt to fend off an enforcer, hides his heart. The player takes a special blade, waits for the enforcer to enter the home, slashes Motier, and paralyzes him. This tricks hides his heart into thinking that the Dark Brotherhood killed off Francois, and therefore, the loan shark debt no longer needs to be paid off. Sometimes, these pranks can be used for the betterment of others. Staying on the topic of the Dark Brotherhood, another big one is the quest, Whodunit. The player is sent to Summit Mist Manor and is tasked with taking out 5 targets at once. The catch is that everyone believes they're there for some kind of treasure hunt, and no one knows their life is in danger. Well, in order to get your bonus, it has to stay that way. Using lies, deception, and manipulation, the player can isolate each target and carry out the kill. What's more, the player can fuel the targets' hatred for one another by telling half-truths and flat-out lies. This results in several of the contestants duking it out with one another, making the player's job a lot easier. Moving on to another storyline, let's talk about the main quest. One mission that stands out for its trickery is Dagon Shrine. In this quest, the player poses as a Mythic Dawn agent and gains entrance to their lair in the Lake Arius caverns. Going undercover using the Mythic Dawn garb, a set of lies, and your wits, they think you're truly one of them. You go along with their schemes and rituals until finally, the moment's right. After all the lies and deceptions have settled, the player makes an attempt at the Mysterium Xarxes and runs off with the coveted book. Sticking to the main questline, the predecessor to Dagon Shrine is the Path of Dawn. Coincidentally, another quest that has the player, quote, pranking the Mythic Dawn. Once the 4th volume of the commentaries has been acquired, Boris and the player venture into the sewers in order to meet with the cult. Outside the meeting spot, the player can choose to pose as the initiate, and by doing so, they lead Raven Cameron and his companions into believing that you actually want to join the Mythic Dawn. The player sits idle and listens to the young Cameron yap on until finally, Boris strikes and the ambush works. Alright, now let's go over some of the goofs in Oblivion's side quests. Up first, there's the Siren's Deception. A gang of women have been seducing the married men in Anvil, taking them to a third-party location and robbing them of their goods. The player, privy to said scheme, goes along with the gang and meets them at Guidon Farm. While Faustina is trying to get the player to remove their clothes, or is just trying to get them to join the gang, the player hits her with the Uno reverse. You say that you're actually there to recover Gogin's ring. This is followed by a bloodbath, but really, the whole quest is riddled with deceit. Signy and Faustina's proposition, the player's complacency, and Gauguin and Melona's true identities. Up next is an unexpected voyage. While the players aboard the bloated float at the waterfront, they rent a room, go to sleep, and wake up at sea. A group of bandits has taken over the ship, and they've taken some prisoners. Using common sense, lies, and their cunning, the player has the option of speaking to every single member of the Blackwater Brigands. They can pretend to be the fifth member of the gang and get vital information out of the other three. As for the fourth, Celine, using said vital information that was obtained via trickery, you can get her to surrender and lay down her arms. Coming in third for the side quests is Paranoia. This mission involves the player working with the town centric, Glarthur. Glarthur believes that several citizens of the town are spying on him, and therefore he'd like the player to spy on them. There are 2 levels of lies and deceit for this one. For starters, the player doesn't even have to look into any of the 3 NPCs. You can just wait until nightfall and tell Glarthur whatever you'd like. For the most part, he takes your word for it. Another version of trickery is actually spying on the targets and lying to Glarthur by saying that they are watching him, because if you play through Paranoia, you'll know that's false. Then, last for the side quests is 2 sides of the coin. For this one, the player works both sides. Arnora wants the treasure that her and Erunder worked for, yet Erunder keeps it hidden as he believes that Arnora set him up. From the get-go, the player works with Arnora to get the information out of Erunder. By committing a crime and being sent to jail, Erunder is made to believe that the player is a lowlife like him. This is how the player gains his trust and gets a step closer to the treasure. Following that, the player has the ability to trick Erunder into believing that Arnora is dead. The Nord wants his accomplice dead for what she did to him. By continuing to work with Arnora, the player can show him her real, prized amulet as fake proof that she was killed. In the end though, everyone loses. Well, except the player. They come out of it with the treasure. Alright, now let's get into some of the quest lines where really only 1 or 2 of the quests involve a trick. For starters, there's the Fighters Guild's infiltration. For this mission, the player goes undercover to learn more about the Blackwood Company. Posing as a new recruit for the rivaling faction, the player denies having any affiliation with the Fighters Guild. The Blackwood Company believes the lies and takes you on as an initiate. There, you learn more about their methods and end up getting duped yourself. The company refuses to reveal information on the heists app, and because of it, the player is led to believe that they're killing goblins at Water's Edge, instead of people and sheep. The next questline that only has 1 leg-pulling quest in it is the Mages Guild's Bruma recommendation. This quest is all about pranking Jean Frisoric, the leader of the Bruma Hall. Jean wants the player to locate Jaskar, as he's recently gone missing. It's revealed through another NPC named Valinaro that Jaskar is simply hiding out, using Chameleon, as all the 2 want to do is mess with Jean. In order for the guys to move on with their prank, they have the player begin another by stealing Jean's manual of spellcraft. Taking it from her personal quarters, Jaskar ends the Chameleon spell, and Frisoric is left in the dark on how to cast most spells. Moving on, the Thieves Guild is in a bit of an interesting spot. While there's a lot of stealing, which potentially results in confusion from some of the NPCs, I did my best to try and draw a fine line between simple theft and tricking. I've narrowed it down to 2 quests, and the first one is pretty cut and dry. The ultimate heist has the player sneaking into the Imperial Palace in order to steal an Elder Scroll. There's a whole myriad of steps that the player needs to follow in order to get there, and one of them is posing as Celia Cameron, a member of the Cameron dynasty. The trick is simple. The Grey Fox made it seem as though Celia was visiting the Imperial Library. Here, the player, who's posing as Celia, is tended to by blind moth priests. They obviously can't verify the player's identity, and by continuing the ruse, they willingly hand you the Elder Scroll. Plus, once the ultimate heist is over with, the player receives the Grey Cowl and becomes the Grey Fox. This is the final boss of deception and pranking, as the player can commit almost any crime and it gets blamed on an entirely different entity. The second Thieves Guild quest for this list is Misdirection. For this one, the player works with 4 other thieves to pull off a string of high-profile thefts. This is all in an attempt to lift the Imperial siege at the waterfront. The player's job is to steal Hromir's ice staff from the Mages Guild. Doing so isn't difficult, and it's not the trick. The real scheme comes from the aftermath. As a sign of good faith, Metherdel makes you return the staff. However, she wants you to do it in a particular way. The Bosmer asks the player to deposit the staff in Ontis Vanis's personal chest. Vanis is a former researcher for the university, and in doing so, the player effectively frames Ontis for the theft. Or, at the very least, this little stunt takes some of the heat away from the guild. Alright, jumping back to the Deja quests, these next 2 are definitely more prevalent with their pranks. First off, there's Mephala's Deja quest. The web spinner wants the player to stir the pot over at Bleaker's Way. The Ulfgar and Dalvalu clans live there in harmony, but under the surface, there's envy, corruption, and desire. Following Mephala's scheme, the player kills the leaders of both families, Hrol and Nivan. From there, they plant evidence on both corpses, making it look like the opposing family committed the crime. Once the bodies are discovered, mayhem ensues. The player successfully tricked both sides into believing that the other murdered their leader, and it's an all-out bloodbath in Bleaker's Way. The last of the Daedric quests that involves some level of trickery is Molag Bal's. Molag Bal's task involves corrupting Melis Batelius, a retired adventurer who swore off violence. The Daedric prince sends the player to Brindleholm where they confront Batelius. Melis recently lost his wife, and talk about kicking a man while he's down. The player drops the cursed mace, an item given to them by Bal, in front of the grieving Imperial. After taking some cheap shots at him, Melis, an emotional wreck, picks up the mace and starts wailing on the player. After killing you, Bal resurrects the hero of Kavach. Returning to Brindleholm, this confuses and scares Melis, leading him to believe he's going to be tormented by the player forever. As the list runs down, I wanted to jump back into the Dark Brotherhood. One of the quests, Bad Medicine, involves a fair bit of deception. The player is tasked with assassinating the warlord, Roderick, at Fort Such. In order to get the bonus for the contract, the player must get in and out undetected. They also have to swap out Roderick's medicine for poison. By replacing the bottles, Roderick's guards end up giving him the poison, which they obviously believe to be the medicine. This ends up killing Roderick, and the result is one deadly trick. Up next is Next of Kin. For this quest, the player is told via dead drop that the entire Draconis family is their next target. The catch though is that all 5 members are scattered around Cyrodiil, and tracking them down is going to be rather difficult. However, the player starts with Paranoia, the matron of the family, as it's common knowledge that she lives at Applewatch. Approaching Paranoia and asking about her family, the player is able to trick her into believing that they're there on behalf of some gift delivery service. This causes Paranoia to happily give up her family's whereabouts. Little does she know that that one slight ends up being the end of her entire family line. Then lastly, the final entry for the Dark Brotherhood is a matter of honor. During this quest, the player is tasked with tracking down and killing Alval Uvani. You're led to believe that Alval's contract was put out by his paranoid wife, but instead, it ends up being Matthew Bellamont's doing. One of the ways Alval can be restrained is by taking advantage of his honey allergy. Acquiring a bottle of mead, the player can place it in front of Alval while he's eating. The mix-up leads to him taking a few sips, and from there, total body paralysis takes over. Again, one simple leg pull leads to a rather deadly result. So at this point, there are only a few quests left for this list. Again, please tell me if you think I missed anything in the comment section below. There are a lot of little pranks and moments of deception for a lot of these quests. While I feel like I got them all, it always helps to hear the feedback from the comments. Alright, circling back to the main story, the last little bit of trickery comes from the quest's Paradise. When the player enters the Forbidden Grotto, they run into a Mythic Dawn cultist named Eldamil. Eldamil has snapped out of his brainwashing and offers to help the player take down Mankar Cameron. In order to exit the grotto, the player needs to deceive a high-ranking Jamora, Orth. This is so that Orth believes the player's been tortured and or killed. Eldamil, playing into his role as a cultist, tells the player to get inside one of the cages. As the cage lowers towards the lava, Orth is pleased and walks away. Before the player hits the lava, Eldamil raises the cage back up, and after having deceived the Daedric forces, the two of you continue through the grotto and into Karak Agailar. The final 2 quests come from the Shivering Isles DLC. The first one is Baiting the Trap. After clearing Xidillion of its inhabitants and activating the Resonator, a new set of adventurers has arrived on site. Xidillion's main purpose is to pick and choose who stays at the Isles, who is already mad, and who needs a little push towards insanity. The adventurers are subject to some horrific occurrences, and it's all thanks to the player who simply pushes a button. The player chooses what happens next to the targets, and it's definitely one of the more terrifying pranks. Then the last entry for this list comes from the quest Ushnar's Terror. Ushnar, a citizen of Crucible, is terrified of cats. He keeps dogs around in order to keep cats away. However, Bisha, a local Khajiit, loves dogs, and therefore follows the orc around all day. Ushnar wants Bisha gone, and he asks the player to handle that. One of the ways the player can do that is by sneaking into Ushnar's house, stealing his dog's food, and planting it on Bisha. This little feat of trickery leads Ushnar into attacking and killing Bisha himself, which again is definitely more of a harmful prank. With that, thus concludes all of the tricks for the trick-or-treat portion of Oblivion. If you're watching this during Halloween, it's probably a pretty relevant video. Otherwise, hey, Who doesn't love a good prank? Let me know down below what you'd add to this list, and until next time, keep on adventuring.